I love this story. In truth, I like all the stories in this book, although not all the stories I have written. But this is a special favorite. Not because it ended the cycle I began with the Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, but because it so resolutely refuses to be like other stories. It is its own wistful self, always, weeping as it smiles. I hope you love it too. That's Gene Wolfe's afterword to The Death of the Island Doctor, which is the short story we're going to be covering today as we recline in the Beagle Child. I'm Joel Davidson. I have with me Alex Latanzi and Henry Canine, and we're all going to be jumping into this wonderful and yeah, wonderfully short entry by the great Gene Wolfe. So, gentlemen, I think just to get us started here, let's talk a little bit about our brushes, many or few, as we may have had with Gene Wolfe.
Funny.
Hmm.
A brush with Gene Wolfe. That itself would be a a phenomenal short story title, and that speaks to the man himself.
Brushed by the mustache.
Exactly. I read about Gene Wolfe before I read any of his stories. I came across the name back some 6 or 7 years ago while reading a memoir, sort of by Neil Gaiman. Uh, or Neil Gaiman, it's called Views from the Cheap Seats. It's, and Neil, and I didn't know at that time, he was very good friends with Gene Wolfe, and he wrote this very lovely tribute to him. And he mentioned that something, he compared Gene Wolfe's prose to somebody, throwing knives at people. Uh, you know, how Gene Wolfe isn't concerned about whether anyone gets stuck or pricked by the knife because he's the one that's throwing them. And I thought, my goodness, what a very interesting description of from one writer to another. And then I came across my first story. I think the first story from Gene Wolfe that I read was um, in a collection of fairy tales that had been retold, and I can't remember. I think the story was called The Gingerbread Man,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
yeah, I think that one. I think that's the first one, the first ever Gene Wolfe story that I read, and my goodness, was Neil Gaiman correct? Just um, every word, every sentence, every paragraph, every page had had subtlety and craft and uh, a good type of danger put into them. So it was, yeah, that's how I found him. So his friend Neil Gaiman introduced me to him, then I found him on my own, and very glad to be uh, talking about him today. He was something else.
I could say a few things about being introduced to Gene Wolfe. I had as a I discovered him just you know happened to because my dad gave me a copy of or was his copy of this wonderful science fiction anthology called The World Treasury of Science Fiction, and just an amazing collection of really well chosen stories. And in high school, I started reading this, and it had stories by like John W. Campbell, Borges, Anthony Burgess. It had just Arthur C. Clarke, kind of all, but a lot of stories were not the usual ones that you kind of see anthologized, and then it has some really unusual stuff, like this one story called Triceratops by this Japanese author who I can't recall off the top of my head. But
Kono Tensei.
Kono Tensei. Yeah. Well, the fifth head of Cerberus was in there in that collection, and it sounded really cool. And I started reading it, and I always remember being on the bus, like going to or from school, and just reading that story and being just mystified because of all of these details that were emerging bit by bit that suddenly were creating like the sense of, like, of what this environment was, because as anyone who's read Gene Wolfe knows, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like digging, it's like excavation, it's, you know, and that's what the fifth head of Cerberus was like. Reading that, where you're like, oh, okay, you think it's the setting is one thing, and then he just drops in this character who you've been hearing speak this whole time. Now suddenly there's this one little detail that Gene Wolfe drops in about them that just reveals that he's a robot, or the setting is Mars, or just all these in the future. But the description of these things made you think that it's an older place on Earth, and it was, yeah, that's always stuck with me, that story. And it wasn't until many years later, only a couple years later, that that I read Book of the New Sun simultaneously with Joel. But and it was interesting too, because the fifth head of Cerberus made me think of this segment from Robot Carnival, the anime anthology film. There's a segment called Presence, which takes place in what looks like this English Victorian setting, but just nonchalantly and almost like humorously, there are these like high tech or elements introduced, like these, that robots are part of this society, that there's this technology integrated into it. There's some unexplained weirdness to it, and that felt very Gene Wolfe, especially like looking back now. But yeah, so that was my introduction to Gene Wolfe.
Yeah, that's great. I'm struggling to remember whether I was also introduced to Gene Wolfe through the World Treasury of Science Fiction and the novella Fifth Head of Cerberus, or if it was another collection edited by Gardner Dozois called Classic Short Novels of Science Fiction. That one had The Death of Dr. Island, which we'll explain why, and we'll get there. But one
There's
of the
lore.
there's a deep history, and deep literature, and they may be the same thing. Yeah, you see what I did there. But
You're good. You're good.
yeah, so we'll get there, but it was one of those two stories, and I had was really captivated by them, but and kind of bookmarked, oh, I need to check out more Gene Wolfe later. And from there, I picked up, it was actually this very collection, The Best of Gene Wolfe, which is kind of a latter-day collection of many of his short stories. Sadly, I think I discovered him right before he passed away, and then I think he died in 2019, and then I really fell in love with his work after that time. And yeah, like Alex said, I read Book of the New Sun. I've read that one multiple times now, and many of his short stories, some of his other novels, and he's become one of my favorite authors. And kind of the thing about Gene Wolfe that everybody says is you don't really know what a Gene Wolfe story is about on the first reading. You know, it's they're entrancing and they're exciting, and you have a full kind of rich meal the first time you read the story. But it's when you go back to it and realize that things aren't quite what you thought they were, and those little bits and bobs that felt like bad prose were actually hints at a deeper layer to the story. Like Alex is talking about excavation. It leads to a lot of people thinking that Gene Wolfe is a postmodern author. You know, where all knowledge is kind of subjective in a way. You can't really get to a true reading of what's going on. You know, it's your own interpretation is as valid as anyone else's, is as valid as Gene Wolfe's. But that's not really the case. His stories are layered, and there are things which can be debated and interpreted. But the difference is Gene Wolfe knows what's going on, right? Like Henry said, Gene Wolfe is throwing the knives. He was, before he was an author, an engineer. And famously, he was one of the three engineers who developed the process by which Pringles are made. And he himself, especially later in his life, looked like the guy on the Pringles can, Julius Pringle, with the big mustache and the just the all that. But Wolf
So
scholar
maybe it
Mark
was
Armin-
Pringles that he's throwing and not knives.
That could be. That could
be.
It's dangerous in their own right.
Right.
Once you pop, you can't stop.
Right.
And and Gene Wolfe's own. This is completely a rabbit trail, but Gene Wolfe's own recollections on his experience working with Pringles is very Wolfian in that there's this sort of bittersweetness. Like, yes, he helped create this beautiful thing, but it could have been so much better. But the company, because they had worked on designing a potato chip that would have a satisfying crunch, taste delicious, and also be resilient in the can. They had this perfect formula that, you would get a can of Pringles and none of them are broken inside the can. But Pringles kind of looked at their margins and decided that they could reduce the quality of the Pringles such that a few Pringles would be broken in the can, and it would kind of help their bottom line. And Gene Wolfe was always disappointed that they opted for giving the customer a can of partially shattered potato chips when it could have been so much better. But that's a totally other side. But Wolf scholar Mark Aramini put it really well, where he kind of applies Gene Wolfe's engineering background to his fiction. Engineering and hard sciences, they're difficult, but ultimately there is a solution. There is something behind the theory that has to work. If the machine doesn't function according to certain natural laws, the Pringles don't get made. And so Gene Wolfe stories are, definitely layered. There's a lot about them that can be confusing or difficult to interpret. But in a lot of cases, his stories do have kind of a central meaning or an idea that you can get at through many, many readings. And so there's a quote that I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it right in front of me here. But Gene Wolfe's definition of a good novel or a good story in general is one that can be read by an intelligent reader with pleasure and then reread with increasing pleasure. And so that's what he's going for, not trying to conceal what the story is really about to frustrate the reader or focus on Gene Wolfe's brilliance, but instead so that you can enjoy the story and that there's something for you to come back to and think about and peel back the layers of as you go through it. In that case, today's story, The Death of the Island Doctor, is actually pretty straightforward for a Gene Wolfe story. There's a couple of tricks in there, and there's plenty to talk about, but it's a great introductory Gene Wolfe story, I think, because the overall narrative is pretty straightforward and easy to get at. There's not some twist that's going to completely reinterpret all of the events in the story. We can kind of grasp at what it is from the get-go. But I guess before we dive into the story itself, which I'm excited to do with you guys, we should probably talk about the title. So
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll lead into that by saying that this morning, I spent a good long while reading and getting halfway through The Death of Dr. Island. Before I looked at the message again of which story we were reading and saw it was Death of the Island Doctor, and I was like, oh crap. And I'm like, how long is this story? Oh, okay. So I'm like, okay, thank God the story's only a few pages long. So I was able
Death
to.
of Dr. Island is not short.
It is
So,
like 50
Yeah.
pages or so.
yeah.
It's somewhere in the afterlife, sort of grunted with content, with satisfaction over that.
Yeah. So there's
Probably lit
yeah.
lit a smug cigarette or something like I gets them every time. Gets them
Maybe
every
Smug
time.
Pringle.
There's
Yeah.
definite need for disambiguation.
Yes. Okay. So, Gene Wolfe, and let me see if I can just get it right here, because I have the table, the publication history here. In 1970, Gene Wolfe had a short story published called "The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories." Uh, an incredible short story. We've read it as a group. We'll probably, discuss it at some point in the future. It's a beautiful story. It appeared in Orbit number 7 in 1970, edited by Damon Knight. And it was nominated for a Nebula Award for that year's Nebula Awards. Isaac Asimov was presenting the Nebulas that year. And he was given the winner. And what they do at these awards is, they're voted on, I think, by SFWA members, Science Fiction Writers of America members, and the story with the most votes wins. But some years, none of the nominees receive an award, either because maybe there weren't enough voters, or there was a multi-way tie. I'm not really sure how the rules work there. But that year, they did not award a story for Best Short Story. But Isaac Asimov was handed an envelope that said no award, and he assumed it was a mistake, so he read the next story that was on the list under no award, which was The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. Gene Wolfe gets up to accept his award, only to find out that he lost to no award.
And isn't there there's a photo there's footage of the ceremonies where I think they had a slide that they would project, and it just says no award, and there's a picture of a rat.
Yeah, that may have been in later years once they started recording them. But yeah, they definitely played that up. But kind of licking his wounds from that, the author John Jakes turned to Gene Wolfe and said, Gene, if you just write The Death of Dr. Island now, you'd win. And Gene Wolfe, responds with, he thinks I can't do it. We'll see about that. So he wrote another story, which is the one that Alex accidentally read half of, The Death of Dr. Island. And lo and behold, it did win the Nebula, which is a crazy story. But he couldn't stop there, because there's multiple combinations that you can do with that title. So next he wrote The Doctor of Death Island. And then he wrote this story today. But the interesting thing about this one is that it wasn't published as a standalone story somewhere. It's actually hidden in the foreword to a book called The Wolfe Archipelago, which collects all of the Island Doctor Death stories, all 3 of them. And then this one is snuck in at the beginning, Death of the Island Doctor. So, yeah, it's in some ways you'd think, oh, well, he's just rearranging the same title, and it's, 5 pages in this edition, and it's just hidden in an introduction. This is probably just going to be some tossed off thing. It might be my favorite short story of all time. It's a beautiful tale. So I've been talking a lot. I'll let someone else go. But does somebody want to summarize or kind of introduce this story proper now that we've laid the groundwork?
I would be glad to give my best attempt
Yeah.
to summarize
Please do.
this beautiful story, and then I invite my friends and colleagues here to sort of, clean up any mess that I make, with the attempt. But, we have an aging professor who has a lifelong passion of studying islands, um, of all kinds, and these islands, the islands that are on the map, are as real to him as islands that are strictly just in the stories. Um, there are no there are no distinctions with him, and he wants to give a seminar about these magical places. There's just something he's just drawn to them, and no one signs up because, unbeknownst to him, he's been sabotaged by the chancellor, who's slightly embarrassed at this, this very eccentric professor, and so no one signs up year after year. No one signs up to the Island Doctor's seminar until the old registrar, who is on her way out, who's about to retire, takes her own sort of subtle revenge on the administration for not giving them an adequate air conditioning in the registrar's office. It's just a wonderful motivation. Sabotages them by actually um, adding that there will be credit given to students if they attend the Island Doctor seminar, because prior to it, the chancellor had quietly added that the seminar was not worth anything. It had no credit. It was just a sort of a, sort of a nonsense exercise. But she reverses it, and he finally gets students. A young man and a young woman. I don't think we ever find out their names. Um,
No.
it, Interestingly enough, just a young man and a young woman show up in this, uh, in almost this wizard's tower, the way it's described. Things are over, the path is overgrown, the stones are cracked, and the door is, it's in bad shape due to the being, exposed to elements for so long. And they have, and thanks to these two young people, we get to sit in on um, the most meaningful seminar, one of the most meaningful seminars I've ever had, classes I've ever had in
Oh
college.
yeah.
Um, and he gives them homework, which would be the most, which is probably arguably the most meaningful uh, homework assignment ever given, ever, and which is to go to a place that he directs them to, which leads them to an island, a road, you know, certain roads to certain others, till they come to one road that is unpaved and has the river for its end, as the story describes it. And so from the river, they too go to an island. And he says, "Come back and tell me what magical thing you find on this island." And they take the trip. And At first they don't understand it. After they finished it, they really don't know about anything magical that they may have found. Um, Only to come by next week and find that the good doctor had passed away. Passed away in his boat. Went out, and figuratively went out with his boots on, as they would say in secondhand lions. And then it dawns on them, uh, the importance of, that maybe they did find magic on that island. So um, it's wonderful. That's my poor attempt at it. It doesn't cover, like, it does. There's so much uncaptured in that description, but for
No,
me, at least,
that's a masterful
bear
summary, and I think we can
oh,
get into the
thank
details as we go along. But yeah, yeah, a very manful job.
you, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I love this story. Working in education myself, I even love the little sort of interdepartmental politics that opens the story. Yeah, with the registrar and just kind of the business of, offering a no credit class versus a one credit class. And um, I've seen many tenured professors and so on, who are, sometimes in their 80s, their 90s even, just kind of sitting in the faculty lounge, reading a newspaper, and kind of grunting monosyllabically at their colleagues who walk by. And I do find the story very touching for that for that reason among others. But yeah, it's really terrific. And I love too, and we can dive into other manifestations of this, but there is very much kind of the new sort of cynical world that we find ourselves in now versus kind of an older way of seeing things and doing things, and regarding education and academia and all that. I love this little tidbit on the second page in the Best of Gene Wolfe edition. Um, when the young man and later the young woman came to the registrar's office to ask just where the Friday afternoon seminar on islands was to be held, and one of her sub-registrars, who naturally did not know, brought them to see her, she was able to explain, twice and with almost equal satisfaction, where it would be. For the good old custom of holding undergraduate seminars in faculty living rooms had fallen so much out of use at the university that Dr. Insula himself and the old registrar were almost the only people who recalled it. I just think that's so beautiful because it's certainly something that I've never experienced. Going to a wise old professor's house to learn from them. It just seems like something from almost another millennium, not just another time. It yeah, I really do love that. Yeah. So what jumps out at you guys, just kind of from reading the story? What sort of sticks out for you? What are what are some of the things that that you enjoyed or that have kind of grabbed onto you as you think about the story after reading it?
Well, I'll say that I guess I have some affection for this story now. I don't love it. I don't know if it had grabbed me in the same way, but there is a part when the students go to the island and they're just sitting on it, and it's described as it's a pine-covered island, and they just sit there and listening to the wind tell of old things among the boughs of the largest pine, and they're just there, and it made me think of this memory of like, I mean, you're on the island and it's like a different time is different in a way. There's different sounds than there are on the shore, there on the mainland. But there's something I remember. It was on some kind of camping retreat, I think, with the youth group, and at one point, everyone was down at like this river and was swimming in the river, doing all these sorts of things. But across the river, there was this. It looked like an island. I don't know if it connected to the rest of the land, but part of it was kind of like this gravelly, sandy, pebbly, like cliffside, and I kind of climbed up it and went over there on my own, and it, like doing that it kind of has this isolating effect, this feeling that changes the atmosphere, and I don't know. There's not much that was what came to mind as I was reading this, was being on that particular spot, and I think it was around in the Pine Barrens somewhere too. So there were pine trees, but
So your own experience of the magic of islands.
well, yeah, and it's like the isolation. It becomes kind of like the professor's name is Dr. Insula. I mean, I guess you could say no man is an island, but it's
Yeah, he is.
I mean, it's like, yeah, just the name itself. That's what an island is. It's its own world. and that is the feeling you get sometimes. Like I often when I'm driving across a bridge, usually over the Delaware River, one of those, especially like down by Delaware, there's often these islands in the middle of it or just offshore, and you look at that and you wonder, like, what would it be like to be on that island and to just kind of set up on there. There's like probably like wildlife that are living there and everything. So just speaking off the top of my head, it seems like it's definitely like a quiet sort of magic, and it was something that otherwise would not have been known to them had they not gone in there.
Very neat. I like how you described a very quiet type of magic. I enjoyed, amongst other things, and this is a story. As you read for us, Joel, Gene Wolfe was hoping that we'd come to love the story, and I think I am. I'm coming around. I am coming around to love this story. Um, One reason why is that it deals with a season that I love. It's a very autumnal story. It's the on the day that Dr. Insula goes to the chancellor's office to announce announce, not request per se, but to announce that he's going to be teaching a new seminar on islands. It happens on one crisp fall morning, and um, there's another wonderful. There are two or three other fine descriptions of autumn there, and also when the year or the time that the registrar helps Dr. Insula, it's described as a time of year where in there, uh, actually it's not in fall but in summer, but still it says, and there came a time not in fall but rather in that dreary tag end of summer when it is 90 degrees on the sidewalk and the stores have Halloween cards and the first subtly threatening Christmas ornaments are on display. When she could bear it no longer, and then she, but still, even though it's not necessarily autumn, autumn is still it's still brought up there, and Christmas as well. I don't want to get into too many details right off the bat about Christmas, even though I think that plays an important part. But the idea of autumn and Dr. Insula being an autumnal type figure kind of speaks to, at least for me, and it also helped me appreciate him more as a character because, like Autumn, it's very beautiful. It's very, it's beautiful. It's pleasant. It's wondrous, but it doesn't last very. It's a
Mhm.
very, it is a very, in a sense, it's a transition time. It never for autumn hardly ever lasts as long as we want it to, and and in that way, I think Doctor Insula, has Doctor Insula and the season have that in common, and so this is the we're coming to the end of autumn for our main character as the title suggests, and so I'm very grateful, and I think that makes it a well-timed podcast subject.
Mhm.
With us being here in beautiful October, so that's one of the things that stood out to me about it's the use of the seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think for me, this story snuck up on me the first time I read it because I saw, oh, it's just, you know, 5-ish pages, and it starts um, very informally. In fact, it starts with Gene Wolfe himself uh, kind of casually introducing the story, not even in an introduction, just as the opening paragraph. It just says, This story took place in the same university I mentioned in the introduction to Gene Wolfe's Book of Days. At this university, there was once a retired professor, so it's very understated in how it begins. But it kind of, for me, it kind of expands in some really beautiful ways. It's a love story, which again, that kind of sneaks up on the characters as well as the reader. It's really short, and with how short it is, a huge chunk of it is just quotations of other things that don't directly move the story along, but are indeed what the story is about. Working in education, I love that it deals with kind of the heart of education, not what education has become. And it has a few, like I said, it's not massively open to layered interpretation, but there are a few tricks up the story's sleeve, I think, as it goes along. So when it was over, I found myself quite choked up reading it, and even reading it again for the I don't know how manyth time. Even this time, I found myself really quite emotionally invested in it right from the start, with this kind of tragic professor, out of time in many different ways, facing an autumn and facing a college that he barely recognizes, that has forgotten him, and by a sort of fluke finding people to pass something on to, and that actually bearing fruit. I think that's really, really beautiful. And in the second paragraph, which I'll just kind of throw this out there, and then we can move on, and discuss however we want. But to me, I think one of the real keys to the story is here in the second paragraph. This Dr. Insula had been out to pasture for so long that no one could remember anymore what department he had once headed. The Department of Literature said it had been history, and the Department of History said literature. Dr. Insula himself said that in his time they had been the same department, but all the other professors knew that could not be true. And I think that's really that's the conflict at the heart of this story. Yeah, in a lot of ways. It says so much about education and learning and the way that we see the world. And I think it's something that throughout this story, that's the point of conflict, hedges around the separation of, you could say history and literature, you could say science and poetry, if you want, you could say fact and truth. How, in many ways, the tools by which we view the world have been divorced from our tools for understanding the world, and how that plays out in not just theory but in practice and in life, and that kind of underlies so much of what is happening here in these 5 pages.
Right. It's a sort of a, an unasked for divorce between truth and meaning. And
Yeah.
it's but not for Dr. Insula. He remembers things as they were. And to him, Avalon, and let's see, there's another wonderfully mythic island. Oh, Atlantis,
Yep.
Utopia, all these places. He knows them. He knows them as any. He's a special type of cartographer, our Dr. Insula, and in him, the two of them are rightfully joined back together again. And And it appears because he's so old, and because no one comes to his classes, and um, and all of this, there are, if you just take things at face value, it looks as if he's, outdated, useless, silly, frivolous, everything. But that changes once you attend the seminar. And after
Mhm.
that you realize that, oh, it's not Dr. Insula that's on his way out, nor these islands, but rather, um, these things are still with us, and they always will be with us. You know, Dr. Insula is in his, he and his wisdom are the evergreen pines on the island.
Mhm.
They're not going anywhere. And so I think that's also a comforting thought. The story invites you to really consider it. Really, like Alex said, it's something to delve into. It's something to excavate, and you find and you find new and wondrous things every time you do. Like you said, Joel, this is your umpteenth time, reading this story, and I bet I've read it 2 or 3 times myself, and I have a real indication that we'll be reading it again over and over as time goes on. So, um,
Yeah, I
yes, yeah,
I mean I'm interpreting that there's like the suggestion that there's like a romance that kind of emerges between the man and the woman
Yeah.
as a result of that uh, like trip out to the island. And it's subtle, but it's there, like the suggestion of that, which is nice. And the other aspect of the making me it made me think of how in college I was very sad that I didn't get a chance to take a college course on Wagner's Ring Cycle, only because not enough people had enrolled in the class. Um,
They just didn't run the class.
yeah,
That's yeah.
and stuff like that, where it's just yeah, made me think of that. Another thing it reminded me of, I'm like, I like I like this story. The story reminded me. It's kind of like the flip side of another story by Harlan Ellison. Um, but it's I don't know. It reminded me of that, but this is a totally different treatment, and I like this better actually. But there's a story by Harlan Ellison. I forget what it's called, but it's the story about the map maker.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it might be called The Man Who Makes the Maps.
Something, yeah.
I could be wrong about that. Yeah.
I
I know the one you're talking about.
yeah, I think he's like talking about similar territory in there, but I think that
Yeah. Well, do you just want to summarize what that story's about real quick? Just like the logline version? Because it's pretty clever.
I think it's just yeah, it's like a guy who his job forever ago has been to make maps for like all these secret legendary places, I think. I think one like the I forget all of them exactly, but the map to Atlantis or Skull Island, stuff like that. And then his like department or whatever he's working in is like closing, and he's being fired or something. I forget,
Mhm.
but and I forget the rest of it actually. I think the last on the on the last bit at the end of the story is like he's out in the street now walking when some woman asks him for directions somewhere in the city, and he's just kind of like tries to like explain it, and then he stops. He's just like, "Oh, just let me draw you a map."
Mm-hmm.
But I forget. Yeah, but there were some aspects of that that made me think of the idea of somebody, usually an old, forgotten, probably cast aside figure who's sort of the repository of all of these, you know, stories and places and legends.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good comparison that I hadn't thought to make, but you're right. It's in a lot of ways they are very similar, but I think, yeah, Wolfe treats the story with a little more kind of gentleness and subtlety, whereas Ellison, it's kind of there is like a jokiness to
Mm-hmm.
it. There's the melancholy too, but it's much more kind of grab you by the lapels. This one sort of sneaks up on you. Um,
A Harlan Ellison way.
yes,
Did
exactly,
he? It's
exactly.
not necessarily, yes. It's not about shaking the hands. It's about grabbing the lapels at the meeting. And so, especially if you haven't paid the offer. Uh,
Yes.
so, yes. And so this is just, please be patient with me, dear audience. This is not a, not, no, it's a preview. It's a preview for our tribute to Harlan Ellison podcast episode coming up. So,
Mhm.
at some point. And so,
Yeah, definitely. I think another moment in the story that really resonates with me, and I think jumps into some of the things that we've been talking about. Henry, you mentioned earlier that for everyone at the college, Dr. Insula seems like he's the one who's outmoded, who's fading away, but it's really what he represents is something timeless, something that's been along for a very long time, and something that will go on um, after he's dead and after the educational system that's rejected him and the school of thought that's rejected him is dead. And I think there's a hint of that in something that the young man says, because Dr. Island, or excuse me, that's a different story. You do not want to meet Dr. Island, but Dr. Insula in this story is the island doctor. Why Gene Wolfe? Why? But which, by the
I
way,
hear another crunch of the self-satisfied crunch of the Pringle from the after
even he can't eat just one. Um,
right.
yeah, and that's another wrinkle in that I forgot to mention is that the first story was the Island of Doctor Death and Other Stories. Well, that was collected in a short story collection called The Island of Doctor Death and Other Stories and Other Stories. So there you go. That it keeps going and going and going. But the what happens? Dr. Insula is teaching this young man and young woman who've come to his house about islands, and he'll talk about a mythical island, and then he'll relate it to a real place. Talking about Thule, and then saying, well, that's Iceland, and then they're not having it. They don't want these mythical locations to cross with real locations, and comparing I think Avalon to Somerset, and that's they're very skeptical of all of this because they don't want these two worlds to cross, the real and the imagined. And in response to all of this, the young man, responds to Dr. Insula talking about King Arthur. And the young man says, I don't think that's true history. And he says, no one writes true history. This is the young man speaking. All history is subjective, reflecting the perceptions and unacknowledged prejudices of the historian. That being what they had taught him in school. And after his weak answer about Prince Valiant earlier, he was quite proud of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have kind of that postmodern school of thought coming in, which in and of itself is a response to modernism and kind of early, the more, even before that, kind of rationalism, the sort of post-enlightenment idea that, okay, we deal with facts around here. All right, none of this meaning stuff and truth stuff, thank you very much. We need to separate these things out and, separate history and literature. And the young people in the story carry that water as well. But here are also the seeds, I think, of the educational system breaking down even further. Because if all history is subjective, reflecting the perceptions and unacknowledged prejudices of the historian, as the postmodernists would say, then history is literature, in a sense. And so,
Right.
it's a further breaking down of the division that has already taken place. And so, not to put forward that that is the ultimate truth regarding history, but to say that the old guard, which has rejected the even older guard of Dr. Insula, can't hold out against newer ideas, newer thoughts. These things are always um, going to fragment into less and less meaningful categories. And so, what Dr. Insula represents seems to be something more solid.
Oh, it reminds me. I think in one school I was in, the English or literature teacher, she had like on the wall above the blackboard was this Voltaire quote that said, "History is a fable which has been agreed upon." So if you're like talking about the Enlightenment, so there you go. That's like the thinking behind that. Yeah, beginning there.
Yeah, the winners write the history books, etc.
Right. And Dr. Insula, he's in a way, of course, he himself is like an island in in this sea of learning, academia, or if we want to call it learning, this the these antagonistic philosophies all around him, and he just gently, kindly points out to the young man, after the young man explained, attempts to drop a knowledge bomb on Dr. Insulin, saying that it's, there is no true history, and it all depends upon the historian. Then Dr. Insula replies, "Well, then why? Then my history is as good as accepted history. And since there really was a King Arthur," and he goes on to explain it. Then he wonderfully, you know, uh, takes that phrase "true history" and turns it back to an older book by Lucian of Samosata or Samosata. Um, and that's turns it once again turns it right back to the to an old book. Reminds me of, I believe it was either a book itself or an essay by C.S. Lewis called "The Importance of Reading Old Books,"
Mm-hmm.
and how doing so helps us to overcome those prejudices that this newfangled philosophy pretends to be on guard against, when actually itself that modernistic enlightenment, um, materialistic disenchantment attempt at disenchantment is itself not only a prejudice but a self-defeating one too.
Mhm.
And so there's no truth for anyone to hang it on. It's just all it can do is peevishly and loudly insist upon itself, uh, because it can't insist upon any other thing that's good or true or beautiful outside of it. But Dr. Insula and his school of thought have no such problems. Um,
Yes.
they're they have they have no such they have no such self-defeating tendency to them. In fact, there's a wonderfully um, charitable and life-giving aspect to Dr. Insula's way of looking at looking at the world, in his enchanted and not only an enchanted way of looking at things, but a faithful way of looking at things, looking at these islands, and the evidence of the fruitfulness of his perspective is shown. How a new couple, there's these two students, strongly hinted at, we could talk about this later on, that
Mhm.
they will these two students will, a romance might very well may bloom between them, and from that will come a new life into the world. Thanks to, and that child will be, in a sense, a child of the islands of, that from Dr. Insula's seminar. So just as, even though the good doctor is is getting he himself is getting ready to pass away, not only will his wisdom stay around, but it will bring in new life um, after him too. And so um, there's a wonderful continuation there. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. The hope of that romance at the end of the story does carry things on, even though Dr. Insula himself tragically dies. I think the fact that that's there, and that they're willing, even in their cynicism, to acknowledge maybe he was right about there being magic on the island after all.
mhm.
It's not a slam dunk, but it's that hope, that note of hope at the end of the
Yes.
story. Is, just, yeah,
Mhm.
I think so beautiful.
Yeah, well put.
And I get, it is a Gene Wolfe story, so there are a couple of curveballs. You got to kind of, it's not spelled out that the romance happens. You kind of have to infer from, they're talking about the Christmas break, and how they would have to separate for nearly a month. This young man and young woman. So that implies a longing, and that, very beautifully. But there's one other little trick that he plays, and it's, they go to his house for the lecture. The next week they come back for the next seminar class at his house. He doesn't answer the door, but an old woman crosses the street and talks to them. And she says, which I did not catch the first time I read the story. He passed on a week ago yesterday.
Per day. Yes.
Yeah. Which means
Mhm.
that first seminar took place after he had died.
Yes.
Yes.
Uh, Gene Wolfe.
Yeah.
Gene Wolfe, I hear, and once again, I hear the third and loudest self-satisfied crunch of the Pringle in the afterlife.
That one sounded like sour cream and onion.
Exactly. Oh, cheddar has to be a good cheddar.
Pizza.
So something. Yes.
One
The
too.
king of. Yes. Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
What a wonderful. I think of those sentences. I think of them as, um, they're a hinge. They're a hinge in the story that turns the whole. It turns the whole thing, and uh, it can really. I mean, it can leave. It can leave you breathless in a way when that
Mhm.
happens, because it's just a phenomenal. It's one of those powerful elements that maybe sometimes rarely can be caught on camera, can be caught on film and done rightly, but it's really the domain of the of a book, of the written word, to be able to shift things, the entire story, so powerfully, um, just with one line. And yes, the good doctor had been uh, he had been deceased uh, when he gave the best college lecture of all time. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah. Really, really good stuff. I think too, and I do love also just all the wordplay regarding islands throughout the whole story. And even like thematically, I was thinking about this time going through it. We have Dr. Insula, the doctor who's a little cracked on the subject of islands. And then we have a mention that, the Department of Literature and History, are separate departments now, but Dr. Insula insists that at one time they were together and it makes me think of Pangea somehow.
Mm.
Hmm.
Realized that he was the head of the department when almost like all of these fields were united before into kind of one great island, one of learning, and now
Mhm.
they've split off and become siloed. They can no longer talk to each other. Their separation has made islands of one another, and just as Dr. Island brings together this couple, this young man and woman, he's uniting, he's uniting literature and history together as well. But besides that, there's just a lot of fun stuff like, um, you know, he's bringing out coffee and he refers to it as Java. He brings out
Mhm.
tea and he says that it's Ceylon tea. Now it's called now it is Sri Lanka tea, I suppose. Just all these playful things and just the relishing of the names: Great Britain, the Shetlands, the Orkneys, the Hebrides, um, Patmos and Fraxos and Delos and uh, just kind of almost drunk with the beauty of these land masses.
Mhm.
It's you really feel the love of the subject throughout the story. Um, and the quotations. There's a quote from Thompson. Thoreau is in here as well. There's a quote I think from Zorba the Greek. I had to chase down some of these. I didn't. Unfortunately, I'm not as well read as Dr. Insula, so I did not immediately off the top of my head know them all. The one I did know was the Tennyson, was Ulysses,
Mm.
which is fittingly the last thing that he says before he dies, and it kind of hinting at, of course, in Ulysses, he and his men are about to go on that boat for one last hurrah to sail beyond the sunset. And of course, when his body is found, Dr. Insula's body is found in his boat,
Yes.
and which kind of sets he's sailed beyond the sunset. He is gone where Ulysses is gone, and it may be that we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. I love
So
all that
good.
stuff.
So good.
Um, yeah, uh, that's really really good. Any other thoughts on this story before we close up? I think we've covered a lot of ground for what is essentially a 5-page story that was snuck into a foreword for another book. But yeah, any other closing thoughts?
No.
I just want to take a moment to appreciate how Gene Wolfe put really emphasized the word life in afterlife.
Hmm.
Um, and in all these, you get a sense that all these places that the good doctor is describing to these young students, you know, this is where for him it's not only history or literature. He's joined them together, but that is where he's sailing to. He's going to Avalon. He's going to those happy isles where maybe he'll get to see Achilles, whom he once knew. And um, it's the story. It's only a few pages, but it's breathtaking in its scope, and so it covers so much of human experience. And he, um, you know, I think that my last bit, my one of my last tributes to Dr. Insula is that he's one of the most, in the true sense of the word, joyful characters that I've ever have the pleasure of spending time with. Joyful because he knows where he's come from and he knows where he's going, and he's so joyful with on this topic that he can't help but tell people about it even after he's died.
Yes.
It's a great uh cheat on death. This Dr. Insula's life was. And so, huzzah for him and for everything that he stood for. And may we all, return to the story as often as we can and gleam just a little bit more and catch a breeze coming off the pines of an island somewhere. So that's my wrap up thoughts.
Yeah, Alex, how about you? Anything else you wanted to add before we close out the discussion?
Not that I can, not that I can think of. Yeah, no, it's just a lot of appreciation from your own discussion, and probably will read it again in the future.
Yeah, it definitely repays that, I think. But I guess I'll close out. This is another comment from Wolfe. This is from his introduction to Stories from the Old Hotel, where this story also appears. It's another collection. And in this one, Wolfe says, when we were discussing A Civis Laputus Sum, which is another story that appears in that collection, I implied that I dislike all academics, especially in the humanities. Death of the Island Doctor proves I don't. There are still a few left who got into their fields because they actually love them. Not many, but a few. Needless to say, they are scorned by their colleagues, though frequently worshipped by their students. It seems to me that there used to be a lot more of them then than there are now. And yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. A really beautiful story. How about this to close us out? Any other Wolfe recommendations? Other Gene Wolfe stories to go to from here? Because this is a pretty solid introduction, I think. If you want to read something a few pages long that isn't going to utterly break your brain and cast a shadow of darkness over you.
I would say just the fifth head of Cerberus. I haven't read much else Gene Wolfe though, so I couldn't really, maybe not, as qualified as you.
No, that's a great one. Yeah.
I had a wonderful time reading his Wizard Knight duology. Haven't finished them yet. I look forward to. I've read the first book and made a good amount of progress in the second one before something swept me away from it. Almost like a leaf blower, as our audience can hear outside. Here, I'll pause real quickly and hand it off to Joel.
Yep. Oh no, you're good. We actually can't hear it, so yeah, you can keep trucking along.
Oh, good. I'm glad. So there was for those who couldn't hear, there's a good fellow with a leaf blower going around my neighborhood right now. But the Wizard, as I said, the Wizard Knight duology, very wondrous, rewarding. I recommend it for those who maybe you've just finished, hopefully, your rightful annual reading of the Lord of the Rings, because everyone should read that at least once a year, and you want something along those lines, something that's like but unlike, and and also the word keeps coming to me, wondrous. Look for the Wizard Knight books; they're excellent.
Yeah, I have them. I haven't read them yet, but they're on the shelf there.
Yeah, that's terrific. I would say, yeah, if you want to continue on with short fiction, try and find The Best of Gene Wolfe with this terribly uninspired cover from Thank You Tor Books for another mediocre edition. But hey, at least the stories in here are great. Yeah, you can check out some of his longer works. I think the novella version of Fifth Head of Cerberus is in here that Alex recommended. So that's great. The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories is beautiful. The Eye Flash Miracles, his kind of what would you say? Of Mice and Men meets The Wizard of Oz mashup is a beautiful story. Seven American Nights. Or another great short story collection, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, and Other Stories, because that one has a great story called Tracking Song, which is a little longer and will kind of give you a taste of what Book of the New Sun is like. If you want to move on into longer works after that, and see if you're ready for that one. Tracking Song is a good way to get your feet wet. So, but yeah, please do read more Gene Wolfe. Read responsibly. Be careful. Take provisions. Have your priest on speed dial. Whatever you need to do to get through this amazing and very dangerous author. But yes, thanks for stopping by, the Beagle and Child, and sharing a pint with us. And yeah, keep reading.
Until next time.
So long.